It was 1958, and a young private named Elvis Presley stood at attention while his drill sergeant laughed in his face. The base had heard the rumors, the king of rock was now a soldier. But when that sergeant pushed too far, Elvis did something that left the entire platoon speechless. March 24, 1958, Fort Hood, Texas. The morning air was dry and sharp, filled with the scent of oil, dust, and metal polish. Inside the gates, a long line of new recruits stood shoulder to shoulder. Among them, the most famous face in America, Elvis Presley. Private Presley now. The cameras had already caught his arrival earlier that week, flashes bursting as he stepped out of a black sedan. His hair had been neatly trimmed, his sideburns shortened, and the spark of Hollywood replaced by the stiffness of a uniform collar. Reporters shouted, "Elvis, sing something for us," but he only smiled, saluted, and said, "I'm here to serve, just like every other man." That line made the headlines, but on the base it didn't buy him much mercy. By sunrise, he was just another soldier in olive drab, serial number 533107761, waiting for orders, holding a duffel bag heavier than he expected. To his left, a private whispered, "Ain't that really him?" Another muttered, "He'll quit in a week." But Elvis said nothing. He just stared straight ahead, jaw tight. Then came the voice that would define his next 2 years. Presley stepped forward. Sergeant Jack Holloway, tall, sunburned, and carved from pure discipline, squinted at him. "So you're the big star, huh? Let's see if your guitar helps you dig trenches." Laughter rolled down the line of recruits. Elvis nodded once. "Yes, sir." The sergeant leaned closer. "Out here, you ain't the king. You're just another pair of boots." That sentence hit harder than any shove. The men kept laughing, but Elvis stayed silent. Later that night, in the barracks, he unpacked quietly. There was no guitar, no posters, no stage lights, only a plain cot and the rhythmic snoring of 50 other men. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded photo of his mother, Gladys. He whispered, "Gonna make you proud, Mama." The next morning, the base's loudspeakers screamed to life. "Reveille! All units up!" Elvis stumbled out of bed, boots half-laced, joining the rush to the training yard. Dust rose as boots hit dirt in perfect rhythm. The Texas sun burned down hard, but Sergeant Holloway's voice was harder. "Move it, Presley. What's the matter, boy? Forgot your stage steps." Another wave of laughter. Still, Elvis kept pace. Push-ups, sit-ups, march drills. By noon, his shirt clung to him like wet paper, sweat blurring his eyes. When break finally came, a fellow private named Charlie Hodge, a soft-spoken man from Alabama, handed him a canteen. "You're holding up, huh?" Elvis smiled weakly. "Trying to, man." Charlie chuckled. "He's got it out for you." "Maybe," Elvis said, "but he don't scare me." That night, after lights out, Charlie heard him softly humming from the bunk below, a slow, sad tune that faded into the dark. No applause, no spotlight, just the sound of a man remembering who he used to be. But in that stillness, something else stirred, something steady, unbroken. He'd been called a star his whole life. Now he'd learn what it meant to be a soldier. Outside, the Texas wind carried the sound of a distant radio from the officers' lounge, jailhouse rock, crackling through the static. The sergeant paused outside the barracks, listening for a moment, then smirked. "Let's see how long you last, Presley." Inside, Elvis opened his eyes in the dark. He'd heard the challenge, and he wasn't backing down. What would you do if the world took away everything that made you who you are? He'd find out soon enough. The Texas sun didn't forgive anyone. By April 1958, Fort Hood had turned into a furnace of dust and sweat. Boots sank into red mud. Rifles glinted under the heat. And somewhere in that sea of uniforms, Elvis Presley was learning how to disappear. Every morning at 5 a.m., the bugle screamed through the barracks. The men groaned, pulling on damp shirts and dragging themselves into formation. Sergeant Holloway's voice hit next, sharp as barbed wire. "On your feet, girls. Let's see if Hollywood can keep up today." Elvis stood in the front line, jaw set, saying nothing. The days blurred into drills, crawling through trenches, loading rifles, hauling gear uphill till your arms burned. Elvis did it all. No implants, no shortcuts. But Holloway never stopped. He barked insults, daring Elvis to quit. "Sing me a song, superstar," he'd shout during marches. The others laughed. Elvis kept marching. By the third week, his boots were soaked through with sweat. His hands blistered from cleaning rifles till midnight. He hardly spoke. Only when the others were asleep did he hum softly to himself. Quiet enough not to wake anyone, loud enough to keep his soul from breaking. One evening, Private Charlie Hodge found him sitting outside the mess hall, staring at the sunset over the training field. "You ever miss it?" Charlie asked. Elvis nodded. "Every day." "Then why don't you just go home? You could. They'd let you." Elvis shook his head. "Then I'd never look in a mirror the same way again." It was quiet for a moment, just the sound of boots stomping somewhere far off, a whistle blowing in the distance. Then Holloway appeared. His shadow fell across them both. "Break's over, Presley. You think you get special treatment?" Elvis stood. "No, sir." "Good, 'cause you ain't getting any." The sergeant leaned in close, voice dripping with mockery. "You're not a soldier, Presley. You're a pretty boy in a costume." Something in the air changed. Elvis didn't flinch. He met Holloway's stare, and said, steady as steel, "I'll prove you wrong, sir." The sergeant blinked. For the first time there was no smirk, just silence. That night the base felt different. Word spread quickly. Presley stood up to Holloway. Some said the sergeant would double down. Others said maybe he'd finally seen the real man behind the music. But Elvis wasn't thinking about any of that. He was thinking about the promise he'd made to himself the day he got drafted, to serve like everyone else. By the next morning he was first on the field. Before the bugle, before sunrise, he ran laps alone until the others arrived. When they did, he was already drenched in sweat. Holloway watched from the sidelines, arms crossed, face unreadable. Then came the moment no one expected. The colonel announced a surprise inspection scheduled for the following week. Full parade uniform, precision drills, spotless gear. Every platoon was under pressure. For Holloway's unit, it was a chance to either shine or crumble. Charlie whispered, "You know he's gonna ride you twice as hard now." Elvis just smiled faintly. "Good. Let him." The next few days were a blur of cleaning, polishing, and repetition. Elvis spent hours perfecting every movement, every salute, every turn, every shout. His hands shook from exhaustion, but his voice stayed calm when Holloway barked at him. The night before the inspection, the barracks were silent except for the rain tapping against the windows. Charlie looked over at Elvis, who was carefully ironing his uniform one last time. "You nervous?" Elvis smiled softly. "No, man. Just ready." He folded the shirt, slid it over the chair, and whispered under his breath, "Tomorrow, I stand tall." Outside, thunder rolled over Fort Hood, echoing through the dark. Holloway stood alone in his quarters, staring at the roster sheet. His eyes lingered on one name, Presley E. He muttered to himself, "Let's see what you're really made of." The base lights flickered out one by one. Tomorrow would decide everything. Sometimes, respect isn't given. It's earned in silence, through sweat, through patience, through storms. What would you do if the world was waiting for you to fail? Elvis was about to find out. May 14th, 1958, Fort Hood Parade Ground. The sky looked painted in brass. Heat shimmered above the asphalt, and every breath tasted like dust. 200 soldiers stood in formation, rifles straight, boots locked. At the far end of the line, Private Elvis Presley waited, sweat sliding down his neck. The bugle blast cut through the air. "Company, attention!" Colonel Browder, the visiting officer, stepped forward to inspect the ranks. Sergeant Holloway followed behind him, eyes sharp as bayonets. This was the day every soldier feared. One loose thread, one scuff on a boot, and your whole unit paid for it. When the colonel stopped in front of Elvis, the field went silent. The man every radio on base still played was now just another uniform under the Texas sun. Holloway's voice sliced through the silence. "Presley, you think you're still on stage?" A ripple of nervous laughter. Elvis didn't move. "No, sir." The sergeant smirked. "Then show us what you're good at. Let's hear a number." Gasps spread down the line. Even the colonel's brow furrowed. Elvis swallowed hard. His heart pounded like drums under parade music. He wanted to say no, to stay quiet, to prove himself with discipline, not a song. But the eyes, hundreds of them, burned into him. Soldiers, officers, critics. He took one slow breath. "Permission to speak freely, sir?" Holloway blinked. "Granted." Elvis stepped forward one pace, boots clicking in the dirt. His voice was calm, but it carried. "I'll sing when I've earned it, sir. With my service, not my fame." The wind caught his words and carried them across the field. No one moved. No one laughed. Even the colonel's lips twitched into something close to respect. Elvis saluted sharply and stepped back into line. For a heartbeat, the base was silent. Then the colonel barked, "Carry on." Holloway said nothing. He just stared, jaw tight, as if seeing the private for the first time. The inspection ended without a flaw. Not a scuff, not a stumble. The colonel announced, "Excellent discipline, Sergeant. Well done." That night, the barracks buzzed with whispers. "You hear what he said to Holloway? Man, he didn't even blink." Charlie Hodge nudged Elvis at lights out. "You shut that man up without saying a thing." Elvis smiled faintly. "Words don't change people. Actions do." But when the others slept, he sat on the edge of his bunk, staring at his polished boots. The reflection looked back at him, tired, proud, and finally steady. Outside, Holloway walked the training yard alone, the echo of that sentence chasing him through the dark. "I'll sing when I've earned it." He found himself repeating it under his breath. Maybe, for the first time, he believed it. When he reached his quarters, an envelope waited on his bunk. Plain paper, neat handwriting. Inside was a note. "Thank you for pushing me harder than anyone else ever did." Private E. Presley beside it, a small guitar pick. The same kind Elvis had used before his enlistment. Holloway stared at it for a long time. Then he closed his fist around it and whispered, "Guess you earned it, son." The base slept on, unaware that a legend had just learned humility, and a hard man had learned respect. What would you have said in that moment, obey or stand your ground? The days after the inspection felt lighter. No one said it aloud, but everyone knew something had changed. Sergeant Holloway stopped barking every time Elvis passed by. Orders came without the mockery now, just steady, clipped commands. Elvis had proven himself, not with fame but with grit. Still, something in him stayed quiet, unfinished. Weeks passed. Fort Hood's training season dragged on under heavy summer skies. Rain fell in sheets, drenching the parade ground and flooding the bunks with humidity. Tempers rose. Morale dropped. The base needed something, anything, to break the monotony. Then came Friday night. The storm outside had finally stopped, but thunder still rolled faintly across the horizon. Inside the mess hall, soldiers gathered for coffee and cards, sweat sticking to their collars. The air was thick with boredom. Holloway walked in, expecting noise, chaos, anything to yell about. But what he saw stopped him cold. There, sitting on a wooden stool near the window, was Elvis Presley. A borrowed acoustic guitar rested on his knee. The same man who had stood silent through months of drills was now softly strumming a tune. The chatter died immediately. Chairs scraped to a halt. Even the kitchen staff froze. Elvis looked up. "Evening, fellas," he said, voice low and calm. "Heard morale's been rough." A few chuckles. Someone muttered, "You got that right." Elvis smiled faintly. "Well, I ain't got much, but maybe I can help a little." He began to play Heartbreak Hotel. Slow, stripped down, no stage lights, no flash, just wood, strings, and voice. The first notes hung in the air like a prayer. The same song that once shook stadiums now filled a single room. Small, raw, human. Men who had marched beside him in mud now sat still, heads bowed, listening. The hum of the fluorescent lights faded behind the sound of his voice. It wasn't fame anymore, it was healing. When the last line came, Elvis looked toward Holloway. Though it's always crowded, you still find some room. He paused. For broken-hearted soldiers, to cry there in the gloom. Silence. Then the faintest sound. A hand slapping the table once, twice, then thunderous applause. The room erupted. Holloway stood still, arms crossed, jaw set, but his eyes softened. Elvis rose from the stool, straightened his uniform, and saluted the room. "That's for all of us," he said. "The ones still learning to stand tall." The cheering grew louder. Even Holloway couldn't hold back a smile. He stepped forward, hand outstretched. "You said you'd sing when you'd earned it. Guess you just did." Elvis took the handshake firmly. "Yes, sir." For a moment, the tension between them dissolved. Two men, soldier to soldier. Charlie Hodge grinned from the back of the room. "Guess we got ourselves a legend and a buddy." Laughter broke through the air. The barracks felt alive again. Later that night, as the men filed out, Holloway called after him. "Presley." Elvis turned. Holloway tossed something toward him. A small brass badge from his own uniform. "Keep it," he said. "For when you forget, you're more than a headline." Elvis caught it, eyes wide. "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me," Holloway said, already walking away. "Just keep being a good soldier." When the hall was empty, Elvis sat back down on the stool, still holding the guitar. He strummed one last quiet chord. The echo drifted down the hallway like smoke. Outside, thunder rolled again, softer this time, almost like applause from the clouds. And in that sound, somewhere between heaven and the Texas dirt, the king learned that humility could sing louder than fame ever did. Sometimes it isn't the world that needs your song. It's the people right beside you. Would you have played it knowing everyone was watching, or stayed silent to protect your pride? Morning came quiet after the concert. For once, no one hurried through breakfast. Men still talked about it in low voices the night Elvis sang for the soldiers. Even Sergeant Holloway seemed different. He barked orders, but the edge was gone. His words carried weight, not bite. During drills, Elvis noticed something strange. The men moved smoother, cleaner, prouder. A song had done what months of shouting couldn't. After the march, Holloway called, "Presley, front and center." The field went silent. Elvis stepped forward, expecting more sarcasm. Instead, the sergeant removed his cap and held it against his chest. "You did good, soldier," he said quietly. "Better than good." The men froze, not sure if they were hearing right. Elvis blinked, unsure what to say. "Thank you, sir." Holloway nodded. "You proved something out there. You didn't hide behind your name. You earned your stripes the hard way." For the first time since basic training began, both men smiled. That evening, they sat outside the barracks watching the sun drop behind the motor pool. Dust hung in the air like gold. Holloway broke the silence. "When you showed up, I figured you'd last a week. Thought fame made men soft." Elvis chuckled. "Guess I fooled you." "You did," Holloway said. "You fooled us all." He reached into his pocket and handed Elvis a small coin. An old challenge coin from his first combat tour. The edges were worn smooth. "Carry this," he said, "for luck, or discipline, whichever you need more." Elvis turned it over in his palm. "I'll keep it safe." "Do that," Holloway said. "And keep your head high when people call you king. The real crown's heavier than the one on a record sleeve." They laughed softly. By June 1958, Private Presley had completed advanced training. His reports read, "Reliable, resilient, exemplary conduct." The man once mocked as Hollywood soft now ranked near the top of his unit. When word came that he was shipping out to Germany, the whole base lined the parade route to see him off. Holloway stood at the front, arms crossed, waiting. Elvis approached, duffel slung over his shoulder. The sergeant snapped to attention and saluted. Elvis returned it sharply. "Stay safe out there, Presley." "I will, sir." A beat of silence. Then Holloway said, "One more thing. Don't forget the song. The world still needs it." Elvis smiled. Yes, sir. I'll keep it close. The transport truck's engine roared to life. Dust swirled as it rolled away, carrying Elvis toward another continent and another chapter. Holloway watched until the vehicle vanished over the ridge. He pulled the small guitar pick from his pocket, the one Elvis had given him weeks earlier, and held it tight. Funny thing about respect, it sneaks up on you. What's the line between pride and honor? Between mocking someone and learning from them? Sometimes it only takes one honest act to erase 100 doubts. And that day at Fort Hood, every man who'd once laughed at the king of rock and roll now saluted the soldier he had become. October 1st, 1958, Friedberg, Germany. Snowflakes drifted across the airfield as the transport plane touched down. Private Elvis Presley stepped off the ramp into a cold unlike anything he'd known in Texas. The wind stung, but the welcome was louder than the weather. Fans pressed against the fences, waving signs that read, "Welcome Elvis." Inside the gates, though, there were no cheers, only orders. Elvis joined the 3rd Armored Division, Company C. He carried the same rifle, the same rations, the same weight on his shoulders as everyone else. Reporters tried to follow him. He waved them off politely. "I'm here to serve," he said, "not to sing." At night, in the barracks, he wrote letters home. One to his father, one to his fans, and one he never mailed, to Sergeant Jack Holloway. He wrote, "You were right. Discipline's the real music." Days turned into snow-dusted weeks. Elvis shoveled ice, hauled supplies, and learned to cook for his unit. He joked with the men, listened to their stories, even fixed a broken radio so they could hear home. When the first notes of "Love Me Tender" came through the static, the whole room went silent. One soldier whispered, "Hard to believe that voice is sleeping on a bunk next to mine." Elvis smiled. "I'm just another GI, brother." But sometimes, late at night, when everyone else had drifted off, he'd take out a small notebook and hum softly. Unfinished lyrics about distance, about duty, about home. A guard on night watch swore he once heard him singing through the cold. He didn't interrupt. He just stood there, listening until the melody faded into the snow. Then came Christmas. Elvis gathered his squad in the mess hall, decorated with scraps of tinsel. He poured coffee, handed out letters from home, and finally pulled a harmonica from his pocket. "Figured we could use a little music," he said. They laughed, cheered, and joined in, voices rough, hearts warmer than the stoves. For a moment, no one was a celebrity. No one was homesick. They were just men finding joy in the middle of duty. That night, in his locker, Elvis found a small envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with handwriting he recognized instantly. "You did it, son. Proud of you. Keep singing wherever you are. J. Holloway." Elvis sat on his bunk, smiling. The note was dated weeks earlier. Mailed from Fort Hood. Across oceans, respect had found its way back to him. He taped the letter inside his journal beside a photo of his mother. Then he whispered, "I kept my promise." Outside, snow kept falling, blanketing the camp in silence. The wind carried the faint hum of soldiers still singing from the mess hall. Somewhere, far away in Memphis, a radio replayed one of his old hits. But here it sounded different, like an echo of who he used to be. How far would you go to prove your heart still beats beyond the spotlight? Elvis didn't need the stage anymore. He'd found his audience, brothers in uniform, standing shoulder to shoulder in the cold. March 1960, Memphis, Tennessee. A gray Army transport bus rolled through Graceland's gates. 5,000 people lined the streets, waving flags, holding signs, crying Elvis's name. But when he stepped off that bus, something about him was different. The smile was smaller, the eyes steadier. The man who had once lit up stadiums now moved like a soldier. Measured, grounded, calm. Reporters rushed forward. "Elvis, what did the Army teach you?" He looked at the crowd, then down at the ground that had once felt like home. "To stand on my own 2 feet," he said simply. That line made the front page the next morning. Private Presley earns respect the hard way. Inside Graceland, family and friends celebrated. But late that night, when the house finally went quiet, Elvis walked alone through the back garden. The moon hung low, silvering the gravel path. In his hand, he turned over the coin Holloway had given him, still warm from his pocket. He whispered, "Guess we both made it." The following week, he received another package from overseas, a folded American flag and a small card that read, "From the men of Company C. You reminded us what service looks like." Elvis placed the flag in a glass frame beside his mother's photo. He didn't tell the press. He didn't need to. Months later, during his first performance after returning, fans screamed like always. But halfway through the show, he paused. The crowd fell silent. "I used to sing to be heard," he said. "Now I sing to remember." He looked toward the back of the arena where the American flag hung high and saluted before finishing, "Are you lonesome tonight?" Every man from Fort Hood who saw that broadcast knew who that salute was for. Years later, a small brass plaque was placed at Fort Hood's training yard. It read, "Here trained Elvis Presley, 1958. He gave respect and earned it in return." Visitors still stopped there, touching the worn metal, whispering the same thing. He never forgot where he came from, because true respect doesn't roar. It echoes quietly, through choices, through service, through how you treat people when no one's watching. The king of rock and roll left the stage behind in 1958 and came home a man. Would you still chase applause? Or would you rather earn silence that speaks louder? If the story moved you, share it with someone who believes change is impossible. Elvis proved that fame can fade, but character never does. Were you or someone you love part of the service during those years? Tell us your memory below, and keep his quiet victory alive.